If you didn't watch part 1 of this 2-part series, it's not required to understand this video, but it is complementary to it. So please consider watching part 1 first. With that said, where was I?
Oh, goodness. Heavens to fix.
Oh yeah. So in part 1 we saw how Andromeda didn't maintain its standards for storytelling. In this video, we're going to see how Andromeda doesn't even carry the soul of the stories that inspired it.
Does this human have...
Ha! Nope! What remains is a story that doesn't just leave these essential themes out, it outright contradicts them. So join me as we explore how Andromeda didn't only deprive players of its intrinsic meaning, it provides themes that argue against believing in that very message. To better understand the bedrock that Mass Effect was built on, we need to look back to one of the most iconic shows in sci-fi, Star Trek. And to better understand this, we need to look back just over 2 decades before it ever even aired, when the world was still recovering from the fresh horrors of World War II. A testament to how much more terrible war can be when it meets the cruel efficiency of the modern age. Then on August 6, 1945, the world, ready or not, had entered the atomic age. Just over 3 months after the Japanese surrender, 51 sovereign nations agreed to make an organization to air their grievances through talking to each other so that they could do what they could to prevent another war on the scale they had just finished. A new syndicate that we know as today, the United Nations. Headquartered in New York City, this was an attempt to put humanity above nationalistic interests. Even if nations were not sacrificing their sovereignty, there was an open channel that now allowed humanity to settle disputes, to come to each other's aid, to cooperate, more than it ever had before. Flash forward to 1950 and the US was seeing itself in a completely new situation on the world stage. The Western world was beginning to prepare itself against the threat of the Soviet Union. So, a document was written, NSC-68, a top-secret document that the US's National Security Council wrote that would prove to be so influential it outlined the future of American foreign policy for the foreseeable future. In it, the US's objective was to protect any free society that values the individual as an end in himself, requiring of him only that measure of self-discipline and self-restraint that makes the rights of each individual compatible with the rights of every other individual. It goes on to say, from this idea of freedom with responsibility derives the marvelous diversity, the deep tolerance, the lawfulness of the free society. Remember, this was a top-secret document that, at the time, was only meant for President Harry Truman. It wasn't an attempt at propaganda or giving the president a theme for his speeches to help ground the American identity. The National Security Council really believed this to be the genuine strength of a free society, a strength that they predicted would give them the ability to outmaneuver the totalitarian government who had a populace they could more easily control. This country, the USSR, is what the National Security Council was responding to. The United States' new mortal enemy.
It can't happen here? Well, this is what it looks like, if it should.
The US was defining its foreign policy based on idealism. No longer would it be a country of isolationism, it would be a country that promoted liberty for the individual because it was through individuals that societies gained their quote marvelous diversity. This wasn't all a good thing because the National Security Council was aware our democracy was vulnerable due to its reliance on the individual, and that meant a free society had to operate through persuasion and consent rather than compulsion and capitulation. But still, they thought the benefits of a free society compensated for its vulnerabilities because of what freedom offered the individual's creativity and what that meant for our collective collaboration. So the US would go on to spread these values, not only because it would help protect innocent foreign people from the Soviet threat, but because it would empower the US to defend itself from the Soviet threat. In the following years, the US began implementing this foreign policy, and concurrently, the United Nations adopted more members. Flash forward to 1966 and we see why this all matters. Because as we're going to see, this initiative of uniting disparate groups behind a commitment to common humanistic ideals, allowing us to have more reasons to work together towards a common goal, is going to influence one of the most iconic shows in popular sci-fi.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
Star Trek. It was filled with low-budget effects, plagued with over-the-top acting, and, in its own way, exploring the potentials of the new world the US found itself in. Its premise was an important one, and it was a lesson the world was still learning the importance of: cooperation across independent, sovereign nations. It would be the key to humanity's success in space, and it would prove to extend to cooperation with aliens as well. So it's with symbolic intent that the now familiar concept of the United Federation of Planets is situated in San Francisco, the very place where the Charter of the United Nations was negotiated and signed in 1945. And it's the reason we enjoy the rich diversity of the crew: a white American, an Asian American, an African woman, a Scot, a Russian, and an alien. It was cooperation across individuals whose strengths contributed to a marvelous diversity. It was something that the nation needed to see. With racial tensions and civil unrest at an all-time high, and political assassinations assaulting the American psyche, they needed to see a future for the country and for the world. And as far as Star Trek was concerned, people could see that future simply by looking at their television screens. It was here that they would see a collaboration of people from all over the world working to accomplish something great, even if those people are from a nation that are, at the time of airing, their enemies. Now, it should be noted that Star Trek didn't buy into the current American foreign policy wholesale. It even seemed to criticize some of its foreign policy, like the Vietnam War in the episode Let That Be Your Last Battlefield.
Free to live our lives in equality and dignity.
Yes, you were free if you knew how to use your freedom. You were free enough to slaughter and to burn all the things that had been built.
But with that said, there is good evidence that the creators of Star Trek saw the US as a force for good. Perhaps not when it was dropping bombs for freedom, but certainly when it was advocating for freedom through persuasion and consent. And that's why Star Trek seemed to favor diplomacy first when spreading these views. Now, some might rightly push back against the idea that Star Trek was for spreading ideals of freedom and liberty by citing the Prime Directive, the guiding principle of the Federation that prohibited characters from interfering with the internal development of alien civilizations. But even though violating this rule is supposed to be a major breach of protocol, disobeying the Prime Directive seems to be a frequent occurrence.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution. They must apply to everyone, or they mean nothing. Do you understand?
A frequent occurrence that seemed to have an unofficial but common excuse: the commitment to freedom for individuals.
But does our involvement here also constitute a violation of the Prime Directive?
We merely showed them the meaning of what they were fighting for. Liberty and freedom have to be more than just words.
Star Trek didn't only see these values as a good thing in general terms. It would directly advocate for them in reference to the ideological clash in the current geopolitical climate. The Western world saw itself as one that would leave blood on the battlefield if need be for an individual's right to decide their way of life, and they saw the Soviet society as an authoritarian nightmare that was an existential threat to that way of life. This was reflected in Star Trek, but instead of the Soviets, it was represented through the recurring antagonist, the Klingon. And we know this because Gene Kuhn, one of the series producers, has said to have, quote, always played the Klingon very much like the Russians, and it shows. The Klingon make up a society that was understood to be an existential threat to freedom and individual liberties.
You of the Federation, you are much like us.
We're nothing like you. We're a democratic body.
And just as the US saw itself as one to protect freedoms from authoritarian regimes, so too did the Federation tolerate violations of the Prime Directive should the Klingon force them to.
Gentlemen, I have seen what the Klingons do to planets like yours. They are organized into vast slave labor camps. No freedoms whatsoever. Your goods will be confiscated. Hostages taken and killed. Your leaders confined.
But this wasn't only instigated by the Klingon. We find that violating the Prime Directive is something the crew of the Enterprise understood to be permissible if there's any reason that people are unable to use their individual liberties to determine their own futures. And this happens again.
You'll learn to care for yourselves with our help. And there's no trick to putting fruit on trees. You might even enjoy it. You'll learn to build for yourselves, think for yourselves, work for yourselves, and what you create is yours. That's what we call freedom. You'll like it a lot.
And again.
Without freedom of choice, there is no creativity. Without creativity, there is no life. The body dies. The fault is yours.
Are you aiding the body or are you destroying it?
I am not programmed to answer that question.
The justification for it wasn't to impose their own government in place of a competing one. After all, Kirk doesn't enforce a democratic system like the one he's familiar with in place of the one with which he's interfering.
Well, Marplon, you're on your own now. I hope you're up to it.
He didn't claim to know what was good for them in that regard. What he did care about was that a society was free to determine its own future. And while it was obviously more messy in real life, this is largely how the US saw itself in this new world. Custodians of freedom against an adversary who was antithetical to that. Flash forward to 1987, and the world was beginning to look a little more stable. The UN had increased its membership to include about 3/4 of the world's nations, and it was steadily growing. It had been almost 50 years without another major conflict like the first two world wars that kicked off the century. The Cold War was coming to an end, and the future was looking better for the two major powers to not destroy the world.
Doverjai no provajai. Trust but verify.
Назначение этого...
На каждой встрече вы это повторяете.
You repeat that at every meeting.
And everyone's favorite, Star Trek The Next Generation would air and reflect these very changes while still maintaining a dedication to the principle of liberty and freedom, so that we can all benefit from a marvelous diversity. And just like in the original series, we again have a captain who's almost a personification of a commitment to these values.
First time any man's freedom is trodden on. We're all damaged.
And as the Cold War was coming to a close, that also meant the Federation was also now friendly enough with the Klingons that they had one as a member of its officers on board the Enterprise. And in the first episode, Encounter at Farpoint, we see what was practically a treatise on how humanity had outgrown its inherent tribalism and had become that much better for it.
Japan started to make rapid progress.
All we needed to do was stay true to our values we worked so hard to learn. Values of letting the strength of free individuals contribute to our own.
Well, we'll deal with the repercussions later. We must know what you want.
You are many. I am one. What I want is not important.
Don't you understand, Hugh? We're giving you a choice.
Choice.
Flash forward again to 2007, and the world is becoming an even more stable place. Nearly every country in the world is a member of the UN, people are beginning to collaborate across the world instantly as the internet becomes more robust, the world has gone over 60 years without another world war, and we have the release of Mass Effect. It should be said that Mass Effect found its inspiration in a lot of different sci-fi, but it's undeniable that Star Trek was a major influence on it. Like the well-known example of when a captured synthetic aboard the protagonist's ship is given a name.
I'm Beverly. He's Geordi. And you?
You.
You...
No, wait a minute. That's it. Hugh. I'm Geordi.
We are Hugh.
Then what should I call you?
Geth.
I mean you, specifically.
There are currently 1,183 programs active within this platform.
My name is Legion, for we are many.
Well, that seems appropriate.
We are Legion, a terminal of the Geth. We will integrate into Normandy.
But beyond simple homages, I think Mass Effect shows signs that it was majorly influenced by Star Trek because its obvious handwriting can be seen. First, in the premise. Mass Effect doesn't start off with a story about deep space alien invaders. That comes later. But rather, from its first moments, it starts off with a story about a spaceship captain, or soon-to-be, representing humanity among a galactic civilization of peaceful aliens. After all, before Star Trek, aliens weren't generally seen as friendly to Earthlings. And complementary to this premise, and as we're going to see, necessary for the premise to even work, the same themes we just talked about in Star Trek are also present in Mass Effect. Now, the commitment to individualism was something I talked about extensively in my first video on the trilogy. In this video, however, I just want to talk about how the value of an individual's freedom showed up in the first game, because the first Mass Effect was laser focused on this theme. It's why Saren made such a good antagonist. He was a foil, where he represents someone who is willing to sacrifice the freedoms that were essential to his autonomy by submitting to the Reapers in order to save lives.
Do not mire yourself in pointless revolt. Do not sacrifice everything for the sake of petty freedoms.
Shepard represents a character dedicated to liberating oneself from that control.
I'd rather die than live under the rule of those machines.
And this idea of having freedom to determine one's own destiny is a strong theme throughout the game, even if that freedom means the freedom to commit suicide to avoid acting on another agent's will. Vidan emulates this.
It wants me to stop you, but I won't! I won't!
Venezia commits to this principle in a less dramatic way.
I cannot go on. You will have to stop him, Shepard.
Hold on. We've got Netagel. Maybe we can...
No. He is still in my mind. I am not entirely myself. I never will be again.
And, of course, we see it from Saren.
It's not over yet. You can still redeem yourself.
Goodbye, Shepard. Thank you.
It's why Shepard's so important in this context. The dialogue wheel was a mechanic that gives players a literal choice. A freedom that Saren was willing to forfeit that helps sculpt Shepard's identity. The unique quality that humanity offers the galaxy is representing these ideals, and it's the motivation that these ideals fuel that enable us to achieve insurmountable odds, even where seemingly more advanced civilizations were unable to. This is something humans were able to inspire. The commitment to this principle of liberating ourselves from the godlike cycle that constrains our freedom to determine our own future, and unite the galaxy behind that principle.
There is an entire galaxy of races united and ready to face you.
Because as the Reaper saw it, we couldn't be trusted to be truly free.
We impose order on the chaos of organic evolution.
And even if it meant risking destroying all organic life, as Saren promises is the outcome of fighting against our predetermined destiny, we are willing to risk it because we know there's something inherently important to the free individual. We don't know that we're going to come out of it alive, but we do have enough faith in the ideal of individualism to believe we will. This is above all else the role Shepard plays. In fact, it's the entire premise behind Mass Effect 3, and it's likely why he or she dons the symbolic name of Shepard. They will lead all able races in the galaxy behind the cause of liberating all intelligent life from an adversary that intrudes on their free will, even if that means they are fighting against an eternal cycle that may even be necessary for organic life to exist at all. This was something players were likely aware of, that they were leading the sovereign nations of the galaxy to get behind humanity's cause, and we can see it when we look at how players overwhelmingly chose to risk human lives to save the Council that would otherwise be killed by the very beings they denied the existence of.
Our judgment must be based on facts and evidence, not wild imaginings and reckless speculation.
Knowing that intergalactic cooperation was at stake, players were likely to ignore how frustratingly obtuse the Council was being because their cooperation was probably going to be essential to curbing the Reaper threat. And the game wasn't very discreet when it came to asking us to think about our decisions as we would as an ambassador of humanity.
Your species needs to learn its place, Shepard. You're not ready to join the Council.
While I don't think NSC-68 directly inspired Mass Effect, and it of course didn't inspire players to make decisions based on it, I still think we can see echoes of its influence, particularly this concept of leadership to evoke the like-minded ideals in others, because it's eloquently articulated where it says, "As we ourselves demonstrate power, confidence, and a sense of moral political direction, so those same qualities will be evoked in Western Europe." It goes on to say, in sum, the capabilities of our allies are, in an important sense, a function of our own. An affirmative decision to summon up the potential within ourselves would evoke the potential strength within others and add it to our own. And that's probably why most players saved the Council. If we replace Western Europe with the Citadel, we now have Shepard's storyline. This was important thematically. It's everything we fought for in Mass Effect 3 as we as Shepard led the galactic civilizations into victory against the Reapers. It's why we had to help each species with their specific needs before they would send their troops and scientists to take a last stand and defeat the Reapers, not on Palaven or Surkesh, but on Earth. A symbolic monument to the fact that humans had led and organized this effort to save itself and all others in the galaxy. And this principle extends to the local level. It's why humanity's interstellar navy isn't solely funded and maintained by the US or by Russia, it's funded by 18 of the world's largest nations collaborating to explore space. This interstellar navy, of course, dons the symbolic name of Systems Alliance. Uniting independent nations behind a common cause wasn't just a plot device. It was the essential premise behind both Star Trek and Mass Effect. Because, well, it had worked so well for us up to this point. It was meant to symbolize not only what would be the key lesson for humanity to learn from its history, it was meant to symbolize what would be the key to our future. Tolerance, acceptance, and cooperation with other cultures as long as we agreed on the basics of individual rights and freedoms. And this cooperation meant we could conquer the impossible, the remarkable, the final frontier. Flash forward one last time to 2017.
We're all gonna die!
Civil unrest is at its highest in the US since the 60s. People across the world are branching off into physical and virtual tribes, almost all of which have balkanized. The Cold War seems to be heating up again, global cooperation, while not collapsing, is regressing, and of course, Mass Effect Andromeda releases. The game seems to drop all the inspirational messages about unity or leading the galaxy towards a better future, and instead, we see the same balkanization that we see in the real world. That means irreparable grudges within the initiative.
But I don't blame my people for walking out. We're done being used.
Infighting within the tribes.
Clan Nakmor will pay with blood.
Outcasts who resent the Nexus as well as others. A subgroup of the outcasts called the Collective.
Lines are being drawn, Pathfinder. That's all I can say.
The Rokar, the Resistance, and new sovereign nations that pop into existence that you probably don't even remember the name of.
We're from the sovereign nation Advent. A few hundred clicks that way. Our nation. No Nexus interference.
All of whom find it more beneficial to go it alone rather than cooperate with one another. Now, I realize this is the premise of the game. They wanted to make it so there would be an air of desperation in the world of Andromeda, so we could see the things that didn't go as planned, and in Mac Walter's words, see a story unfolding before you get there. But without the idea that we're able to unite these groups behind a common cause defeats the purpose of the very thing that inspired the game.
That nonsense is centuries behind us.
As we just saw, it was supposed to be about how we could learn from our collective history and act on that information to determine how to cooperate so we could accomplish the remarkable, not regress to the very things that Star Trek wanted to show we were better than. But there is no such leadership or goals of large-scale cooperation in Andromeda, for a game that makes you a representative of something literally called the Nexus, a word that's defined as a connection or a series of connections linking two or more things. There's only resentment.
Watch, I'll rescue the drive core and make us so powerful that the Nexus will bow down to us.
Competition.
No advice for you, only regret. Watch, the Krogan will thrive and the initiative will pay.
And hostility between the tribal groups in Andromeda.
I'm not about to let someone else fight my battles, especially an initiative lapdog.
Where the Nexus should be a symbol of our commitment to working together, it's used as a pejorative.
Stay out of Krogan affairs, Nexus.
This would all be fine if Ryder could lead them out of this tribal mindset, but unfortunately for us, and unfortunately for the game, the Ryder character simply doesn't fill the role of leader in this situation. At best, he or she dumb lucks their way into having hostile groups cooperate with the Nexus, which isn't the kind of leadership we're looking for.
Respectfully, the Angara don't need anything from you. We take care of our own.
With the processing power of my AI, I can guarantee the shield breach.
It was risky to be honest about your AI.
Andromeda only has us work together, on the rare occasion because someone else wants something from us.
Where is the drive core? Hand it over.
And even that only comes with threats of a worse future, not the promise of a better one.
Keep it, and you've created a sovereign Krogan nation. We don't abide by Nexus laws or owe you anything, even peace.
Ryder, I must point out that historically, unchecked Krogan advancement has been the cause of war and disaster for many, even the Krogan.
Ryder is a passive character who allows the hostilities of the past to fester, acquiesces to the imaginary divides that shouldn't be insurmountable, and seems to have no ability or desire to convince characters that a principle of working with each other is essential to their progress. What's missing from Andromeda is that affirmative position that grounds the independent nations in a common identity. Without it, well, even NSC-68 is able to predict that the disparate groups will become demoralized. So we need to see a strong stance that persuades independent nations to work together, not because of the principle of tit for tat.
You have to give us something for it. It's only right.
But because of the larger principle that they also will agree is essential to their values. That's what Star Trek represented, and that's what Mass Effect was about.
When the Reapers come, we must stand side by side. We must fight against them as one. And together, we will drive them back into dark space.
This is what plagues Andromeda's world above all else. We don't have a choice in the dialogue wheel that lives up to these virtues that are the life force behind Star Trek and the trilogy. In Morta's storyline, the player's choice isn't based on a commitment to a uniting principle like peace or mutual understanding. It's about whether players get an outpost or don't get an outpost. In the Moshae storyline, players had to decide if they would destroy the Ket facility and all its Angara inhabitants who were abducted, or rescue as many of the Angara as they could, and thereby let the Ket facility stand. This choice in particular ended up not being a choice about any uniting principles like the value of individual lives and our responsibility to risk our own lives, in order to save others if we're able, this was a choice about whether players would secure political points with the Moshae or allow her to resent them for disagreeing with her. Because if you do what I did and make a moral argument for yourself for why you should save the Angara, she'll ignore your perceived moral leadership and respond to you like this.
I feel for your people in a way that you clearly do not for mine.
By having these missions rarely be about players taking affirmative positions on virtues they think will lead the galaxy into the new future, Andromeda makes it frustratingly obvious just how little choice players actually have, because they can feel the missing moral direction. Where we once used to persuade others of joining our cause because we felt the importance of our objective, Andromeda simply isn't interested in making the player feel this way. Andromeda is a game about the uglier side of humanity, tit for tat and settling scores. And as if that wasn't bad enough, one of the few messages of unity that we get is delivered sarcastically.
Okay, Morta, let's work together. You can have the Remnant Drive Core.
And you can set up your outpost here, Nexus. We're all gonna be friends and prosper, right? You bet we are.
And that's what disappoints me most about Andromeda. The virtues expressed in NSC-68 about taking an affirmative position on working together so that we can benefit from that marvelous diversity that's a byproduct of free individuals are not exclusively assigned to be carried out by the US government. Anyone can inspire these virtues, because that's what Star Trek represents, and that's what the Mass Effect trilogy was about. They made an affirmative decision to tell us how lucky we would be as a species to live in a society made up of diverse groups, and how we would all benefit from that collective strength. Andromeda simply distorts this message. The message should never have been, nor was it originally intended to be, that we have to work together whether we like it or not because we reluctantly have to admit we're stuck with each other. The message in its original and intended form is that there are universal values that can unite diverse groups and cause them to have a strong motivation to work together, the end result being we're all stronger for it. And right now, more than ever, we need a message that exalts, not forgets this message of global cooperation. We need a message that romanticizes, not rejects, our ability to work across arbitrary divides. We need a true Mass Effect game that reminds us of why we should be optimistic for our future. Sol Porpoise has a Discord server now. Come hang out with us and benefit from our marvelous diversity. To all my generous patrons, thank you. I'd also like to thank Shane Levengood, Griffin116, Hans Homan, Kelly Kelly, Joshua Herman, Thomas Greenberg, KD, David Sternberg, Furious George, Grant Vogel, Rito Wallstrom, Ashley Dawkins, Max Mills, Jesse Sains, Simon Menzel, Ben Jones, Abit Pakistan, Lupus Yonderboy, and Jack Panette. To all of you, thank you. If you want to support me on Patreon, you can click the link here, or if you just want to see more from me, make sure to subscribe and ring my bell. See you guys next time.